Hello, I'm Renaud from Mountains, and welcome to this tutorial about MMControls. MMControls is my new mobile and native controls library for Unity. I've included it to the latest release of the Corgi Engine, which, if you don't know it, is the best platformer solution for Unity. So today we're going to go over what the MMControls are, how the scripts work, and how to add them to your game. Now, to start things up, if you've imported the Corgi engine, you should have a folder structure kind of like this one. So if you go to MMTools and then MMControls, and if you open that scene, you should see this. So a bunch of buttons and joysticks. Admittedly, it doesn't do much. It's kind of a debug scene, but if you press play, you'll see that it's kind of useful to get a grasp of how things work. So if I press, for example, the X button, you'll see that here in the debug console, it logs everything. So if I press the A button and release it, you'll see that all the events kind of go into the console. Same for all buttons, and in the top left corner you'll also see that, for example, while I keep the X button pressed, it says that on the screen. Same goes for the joysticks, for example. So if I move the left joystick, you'll see that in the top left corner I get all the coordinates. So it ranges from -1 to 1 and -1 to 1 on the vertical axis. Same for the right joystick. It's kind of hard to showcase that on a MacBook, but of course if you use that on mobile, you can move both sticks at the same time independently. Same goes for the buttons. Everything is multi-touch. It works on iOS and Android perfectly. Haven't tested on Windows Phone, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. And then we have the cross here, and if I press down, you'll see that the vertical movement is now -1. Same goes for the horizontal movement. Everything works. So how exactly does this work? Because obviously this is not magic. So if we look at the scene, we'll see that we have a test input manager. As the name implies, this is solely for test purposes. So if we open it, we'll see that it's yeah, that's the one. I'm just gonna close the other ones. So what do we have here? We have a lot of methods because I wanted to include all the possible use cases, but obviously in your game you probably are just gonna need a bunch of these. So we have a method that takes into parameters a vector2, and this will handle the left joystick movement. We have the same for the right joystick. Then we have methods that will do something when a button is pressed, whether it's a button A or B or X, etc. Same thing for pressed for the first time, same thing for released, and then we have the horizontal and vertical axis for the cross, directional cross, same thing for when the left button is pressed for the first time and when the left button is released, and same for all the other buttons. So basically, except for the joysticks, what you have for each button is you can know when it's pressed initially, then you can know when it's released, and then you can know if it's being pressed. So that's all that this class does. It just debugs stuff out on the screen or in the console. Now, if you look at the X button, for example, so I'm just going to go to my scene view. I select the X button. The X button is just GUI image, and it has the MM touch button script. as you can see, we don't have a lot of scripts here. It's all really simple. It's all made for simplicity, ease of use, and multi-device support. So it's really simple. There are a lot of more complex control assets out there. This one just gets things done. So back to the binding. So if you look at the touch button component of the X button, you'll see that it has 3 boxes where you can bind functions. So for example, all of them are linked to our test input manager. In your case, it's probably good to have an input manager class and game object somewhere on your scene. And what you do is, if I, for example, I'm just gonna remove them and show you how it's done. So what I want to do is say, okay, for each of these actions, these events, I'm gonna have a method, and this method is gonna be, and I'm just gonna drag it, is gonna be in test input manager. So I'll just drag it to all the boxes. This can be done for a bunch of buttons at the same time too. If you want to just select them all, and if they're not, you just do that. Basically, easier shown than explained, and that way you're sure that it's gonna work. So if I was on the X button. So what I'm gonna do now is I've bound my X button to the test input manager. So I just have to select the function. So I go here, and I'm on the X button pressed first time, so I just have to find it, and it's here. And I do the same for when the button is released, so X released, and when it's pressed, X pressed. And now I did all that in play mode. But yeah, basically what would happen is that I would press it, and then I'd get the debug logs I wanted. And obviously, if it was in a real game, it would maybe make my character jump. So as you can see, it's really easy to bind a button to a method. You could even have more than one method called. For example, you could have a button that makes your character jump and I don't know, trigger something on the screen. So you would just add another box and bind it to another function. I'm not sure it's a good idea, but you can do that if you want. The only other thing you can tweak is the pressed opacity. So that's the opacity of the button when it's being pressed. By default it's 0.3, but you could have 0.9. So let's do that for the X button and see how it goes. So when I press it, you see that it barely changes color, while when I press the A button, it's barely visible. So you can use that. You could also implement an animation, for example. That's your thing. Just gonna put it back to 0.3. Same thing goes for the joysticks. It's basically the same thing. It's even faster because you only have to bind one method, and that method that you bind must have a parameter, and it must be a vector2. When you select it, it's going to be in dynamic vector2. You have examples in the code, so it's really trivial, but that's something to keep in mind. You can also disable an axis. For example, you have maybe a plane control where you just want to go from left to right, but not move vertically. Just uncheck that checkbox, and as you can see, I cannot move up or down now. It's just locked. And same goes for, of course, you can have just a vertical axis. And you also have the max range. So all that is explained because I've done little information boxes just for you, but you can change the max range, and for example if I put 4, you'll see that I can now drag my joystick knob much further, and it still goes from -1 to 1 and -1 to 1. So that covers pretty much everything you need to know about the test scene, and pretty much everything there is to know about the test scene. It's really simple. Again, that's the whole goal of this thing. Now I'm gonna show you how it works in a real game. So let's open up one of the demos of the Corgi Engine. Let's say we're gonna pick the minimal level. What did I change? I don't care. So if I press play, you'll see that I'm on a MacBook right now, so I don't see the mobile controls, and that's because this thing is clever. So if I select the UI camera, because that's where the Corgi Engine input manager is, right in the bottom right corner, you'll see that automobile detection is checked, and I'm right now in PC Mac build mode. If I were to switch to Android or iOS, the script would detect it and would display the buttons. I'm not going to switch because it takes quite a lot of time, but what I can do is just force the mobile mode. So right now if I press play, you'll see that the buttons are here, and that if I move my joystick, I move my character, I can even move and crouch at the same time. I can also jump, I can jetpack, I can dash. Running is going to be trickier because I only have one mouse and I would need 2 fingers to do that, but you get the idea. So it works exactly like what I've just shown you. If we open the input manager script, you'll see that it's a little more functional and useful than the test one. So what do we have? We have a bunch of initialization stuff. That's where we handle the forced mode and the mobile detection thing. Then we have everything that handles the keys, the keyboard keys or the gamepad keys. So all that is linked, of course, to Unity's native ways. So if I just go to edit project settings input, you'll see that I have a bunch of axes. Jump, jetpack, run, dash, etc. So for example, dash is called dash, its positive button is Q, its alt positive button is joystick button 3, so on my gamepad I think that's the Y. I've got an Xbox gamepad. So all that works like in any other Unity project. The mobile part comes next. So as you can see, for example, if I get the button down of jump, I'm gonna call a method called jump press down, and if I go to that method, what jump press down does is it checks for a bunch of stuff, of states, and if everything is okay, we call player jump start. That's probably the most complex example I could have picked. Run is much simple. So if I press the, so yeah, while the button run is pressed, or if it's the first time it's getting pressed, I call the run method, and the run method just checks that we can move, and if we can move, we call the run start method of the character behavior class. And this method is admittedly much more complex. It's gonna do stuff, but you don't have to worry about that. Well, you can if you want to. Everything's commented, so you should not have much trouble understanding, but for now just know that we tell the player to start running, and that's all we need to know. and the binding works exactly like it would in the test scene. So if I select my buttons, I'm gonna just move over there. So here I have my GUI canvas, and I have my A button. So I think running is the X button. So yeah, so they are all linked to the UI camera component and its input manager component. And I've just selected, the run method when the button is pressed. That's as simple as that. Some must be even simpler. For example, dash. There's only an action bound to the fact that you press the button for the first time. Keeping your dash button pressed doesn't do anything in the Corgi engine, at least in the demos. You can do, of course, much more, but in the demos it's useless, so we've only bound that first event. Something else to keep in mind is that for the joystick knob, you need to have, and I didn't mention that earlier on, I forgot, but you need to bind a camera. You need to bind your UI camera, the camera that's going to render the UI. And that's because you can have more than one, and this one is going to be used for calculations to determine how far you are from the center when moving the joystick knob. That's really easy. You just have to select your joystick knob, select your UI camera, drag it over there, you're done. And basically that's it. That's all there is to know. And now you know how to add your own, controls to your game. I hope you like it. Let me know if you find any bug or anything, and I'm gonna make sure they disappear. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time.